All right, let's begin in Abidjan. The African Development Bank Group's 2025 annual meetings opened today amidst shifting winds of global trade. 47 of Africa's 54 countries have been affected by new U.S. trade measures, with 22 facing tariffs up to 50% on a wide range of exports. They, of course, have been paused for now. In the context of the evolving U.S. foreign assistance priorities and reduced U.S. aid funding, African nations are navigating a changing landscape where traditional forms of support can no longer be taken for granted. The meetings, which of course kicked off today at the bank's headquarters in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire, will be held under the theme, Making Africa's Capital Work Better for Africa's Development. The strategic theme calls on African member countries to look within the continent to identify and harness Africa's diverse capital resources, be it human, natural, financial, commercial, to drive the continent's structural transformation. We're happy to have Arise business correspondent and the host of the Arise Exchange, the legend himself, Boason Omofaye, on the ground in Abidjan. Boason, good afternoon to you. Great to see you. Can you give us a rundown of the key issues as the 60th summit opens in Abidjan? The discussions are going on around leveraging African resources for Africa itself. What's happening there?
Yeah, well, this is very key about how we see things moving on. President Trump says he's going to cut AFDB's funding by as much as $550 million US. That's a lot of money on the table, if you ask me, for Africans. So what we're hearing here on the ground is that this is a time for African presidents, African leaders, to give more commitments to the AFDB to support the funding gap that is coming. Remember, it's not just the United States that is defunding Africa. A total overseas development aid is going to be down by about 2% this year. Remittances, diaspora remittances for Africa will be down about 6% according to the latest African Economic Outlook report just released a few minutes ago here in Côte d'Ivoire by the AFDB. The total foreign assistance to Africa will be down by $4.2 billion US to the continent. That's a whole lot of money. So we've got the African leaders, we've got African policymakers, venture capitalists, investment fund managers, everyone to begin to look for capital within the African continent and how to tap more of the diaspora fund to support the continent. That is where we are right now. The EFDB has gotten a whole lot bigger from 10 years ago to more than nearly $330 billion today in capital. Afrexim Bank is doing also wonderful in terms of the capital base, but of course there's still so much to do that we need more capital from within the continent and from the outside to work for the continent. Rotus.
Certainly, we have to look within. You just mentioned that report that was released a few minutes ago. I guess you haven't had a chance to jump in on yet, but what can we look forward to in that report?
Well, some good news about that report. Across the continent from around, it's about 13.8% this year, according to Urama, the chief economist at the AFDB. That is expected to go to single digits between 2025 and 2026. The poverty head count in Africa is also reducing, and that's one good news, now at about 30.2% so far this year, from about 32.6% or thereabout back in 2020 during the COVID-19, around before the COVID-19 pandemic, back to 2015. So we're seeing that. So there's a lot of a backslapping, as it were, in terms of that report, in terms of how macro policies, reforms are working on the African continent. That is being led in the main by East African region, followed by West Africa, followed by Central Africa, and then the Southern African region. If you consider some of the challenges that South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia had had recently. Then you talk about the three major conundrum for Africa. The risk that Africa pay, or what you call the compensation that Africa has to make for the risk assessment by foreign rating agencies when it comes to our debt profile. Debt is not increasing in Africa according to the AFDB latest economic report. It's just how much we're coughing out in terms of repayment interest on those loans. About $9 billion as at the last estimate according to the AFDB. That's a whole lot of money because of the risk assessment profile of the African continent. So the need for Africa to set up its own rating agency, that is also on the table for discussion here. What we see here right now for this week annual meetings, it's all hands on deck for the African continent. And Nigeria, don't forget, is taking the lead. Nigeria is just pledging about $500 million over the next few years as replenishment for the AFDB Trust Fund. Nigeria is the largest shareholder of the AFDB, even though the chunk of the money on the table for the AFDB is coming from United States and Japan. As we speak today, Japan still stands solidly behind Nigeria when it comes to, through its JIDA, supporting the African continent, infrastructure and other necessary funding. Rotus.
Fantastic summary there from you, Boason Omofaye, on the ground in Abidjan at the AFDB Summit. Boason, will be coming back to you, of course, for the rest of this week for updates. We thank you so much for giving us the latest from the African Development Bank.